What's up, everybody? Today we are going to be talking about blockchain and crypto applied to gaming. So what is the future potential, risks to existing free-to-play monetization, success cases you need to be aware of, future applications we haven't seen yet, and key challenges that need to be overcome. Now, speaking with us on this topic today, we have three really great speakers. The first is Chong An, VP of Product at Mythical Games, the makers of Blanco's Block Party. Second, Brian Peganoff, who is former Senior Director of Corp Dev and Strategy at Glue Mobile. And finally, Mitch Zamara, Lead Designer at Million on Mars. This is the Gamemakers podcast. We're going deep, people, so get ready for a really great conversation on the future of blockchain gaming, starting right now. All right, welcome guys. So the market for crypto and blockchain and gaming seems to be getting pretty hot. A lot of game industry folks, including venture capitalists, who think that this is similar to the early days of free to play. And so I want to get your take on how valid you guys think that is or not. But it does seem like the rumors seem to indicate major initiatives at most of the big gaming companies, Epic accepted, and based upon what I'm hearing, also, it seems like a lot of the Chinese game companies seem to be backing off of crypto. Not surprising given some of the news that kind of was announced last week. But wondering if we could start with that in terms of your take, in terms of one, where are we with respect to the life cycle in terms of blockchain in gaming, and what is your outlook? And I know, Mitch, you're kind of in the midst of this, right? You're kind of like launching stuff right now. So maybe we can start with you, Mitch.
Sure. To be honest, to me, it feels like the pre-boom of social games and free-to-play games back in 2008, like when Mafia Wars was just gaining traction. You know, in 2006 to 8, I worked in Korean free-to-play MMOs when those were first coming over to the West and sort of changing the core business model towards live service games that were free. Back when World of Warcraft was really at the peak, was rising to the peak of its game. And then we saw the sort of transition of social networks boom up in MySpace and Facebook, and then all of a sudden those platforms became the new most biggest opportunity in terms of where a whole new market for players have been. And we saw the rise of those games and how quickly they took over the space, but at the same time were criticized, were often called scams or a fad and a sort of a passing trend by a lot of critics that were observing the industry. And I feel in a lot of ways we're seeing the exact same things today. And I have insane deja vu. That deja vu is literally why I jumped into this space as fast as I could, because it just validated things. I'm just like, oh, I've heard these things before. I remember how wrong they were, and I can't not be here now to prove them wrong myself.
And Chong An, you recently joined Mythical. Maybe you could speak to a little bit about what I don't know, maybe the Mythical perspective or your own perspective, or what caused you to get excited and join Mythical? Because I know you just recently joined.
Yeah, thanks. I have a lot of similarities. I think what Mitch is kind of bringing up. I feel like there's a new platform, there's a new technology, and are there interesting applications that can be applied to the gaming vertical, and what could that be? And having been in, free to play now, similar, right, on social canvas to mobile to PC and everything in between, I started seeing a lot of value add that can be provided to products leveraging blockchain, NFTs, digital ownership, and what that actually means from a player, ecosystem. And so that's really what attracted me to investigate, learn more about the technologies, the players that are in the space. And then ultimately, I decided to choose Mythical as a company to be employed by, because I really like their mission statement ultimately, which is, while they are a platform blockchain technology company, who's their main customers? Ultimately, they want to service game developers, in leveraging this technology to their benefit, and having been serial entrepreneurs, game developers, producers, designers themselves, they know the joys and pains of making software for millions of players. And I think that lens is relatively unique compared to a lot of the other technology platform companies that are currently in the space right now. And so if you kind of read in between the lines, what does that mean? It's leveraging that expertise that Mythical has developed over the years, because they've been in it now for several years at this point. Really leading and understanding and failing in certain areas to kind of get to the acumen that they're at now. And I think that's a really powerful position when you go speak to traditional developers, even free to play ones that just they don't understand the space, right?
Right. And Brian, I know you've got an investment banking background, but also corp strat, most recently at Glue. In addition to kind of the first two questions, I'm also wondering if you could provide a little bit of context in terms of how you think maybe some of the bigger companies should be thinking about this as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny because when you think about that industry titan level that we're discussing when we're thinking about how these things roll out, and those companies have anywhere between $7 to $8 billion in annual revenues like every year. And for them to get really excited and engaged about a big idea and put everything behind it, they kind of need to see like a $1 billion of revenue opportunity in front of them. And especially like if that maintains like the complexity around involving one of their IPs, right? So like a good example of this would be Activision over the years with a Bungie or a King or a COD Mobile. And I think, what we saw in the space like just a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, Axie crossing $2 billion of sales. And I think that was, really important because it validates the use case and the demand case for gaming. And it's a good way to wedge into an early growth market by using IP. And I think that's a logical next step for some of these big players. But it also involves a lot of complexity for them around regulatory questions. But that being said, like most of them are big public companies. They have the institutional muscle and legal and accounting to get this kind of work done. And I think they're going to be coming to the fruition that the only way to really set this place on fire is to get one of those big special IPs that all of us have been playing for 20, 30 plus years.
Right. And then maybe the next question I could ask is really around like NFTs and the play to earn model in terms of, how much of a risk do we think it poses relative like to the current type of monetization that we're seeing in games today, the regular IP based monetization. So I guess, the question would be, how much of a risk is it? And then there were like some pretty crazy predictions in terms of like how much from an ARPU perspective, NFT or play to earn based monetization could get to. And just wondering if you guys have any thoughts on that. Maybe we could go around in the same order. So maybe starting with you, Mitch.
Sure. I can't certainly speculate. I have no speculation on what the sort of ARPDAU potential is in that kind of context. It's really hard to say, especially in the fact that most blockchain and NFT things are barely not even allowed on mobile right now. Right. I think that's its own separate discussion about the upcoming platform wars that I think we're going to likely have. But from a core perspective of like how do you adapt or how does the traditional business models of free to play games move into this new era of play to earn and NFT and blockchain driven games? To me, it all feels like a natural extension of what we've already been doing for a really long time. I feel like we are marching towards an inevitable trend of the notion of ownership for all of your efforts and your virtual goods that you earn inside of your games. I think that people will overall expect that they're going to own the items that they earn inside of their games and have the freedom to do with them as much as they can as possible. And I think obviously in the shorter terms, we'll see a little bit more centralized or custodial type systems that keep things a little bit more protected and sort of isolated, where information is a little bit more controlled and everything is managed on the up and up in a way that a company could feel comfortable offering those kind of assets and products to their customers and be okay with the necessary impending regulatory changes. Sort of in the way that Blankos has their own custodial marketplace for their NFTs, as opposed to having items that you directly buy on OpenSea. I think that kind of approach allows companies to sort of build their own little, not necessarily say walled garden, but their own sort of protected sphere. I could very easily expect to see a Blizzard NFT marketplace or a EA or any of the major players doing the same kind of thing. And a lot of existing titles have natural adaptations to what we're already seeing inside of this space. Some of the more innovative things will certainly have a harder time for natural fits, but we're already very much used to selling limited time driven content in a live service based model The only difference is adding scarcity to the mix, and which we've also done these kind of things back in the old beginning of social games as well. Games like Mafia Wars had a limited number of items you could buy each week or that you could earn inside of their weekly promotional events. These same kind of like scarcity based things can be applied into the adaptation of where free to play games are going.
CA?
Yeah, so yeah, lots of really good points to dive into. I mean, I think at a high level, at least in my opinion, free to play games, as we understand it with the IAP, inflation based economies, I largely don't see it going away anytime soon. There's a massive, massive business that's been, iterated on and hardened over the last 10 years. And do I see that business going away? I don't, right? Because, I mean, even from a player's perspective, if I'm, a super engaged fan playing a particular product and have been so for many years, the change cost of going into a particular product, especially one that's at least at present filled with the kind of friction that you don't expect to see on a, traditional free to play game, it's like night and day, right? So I don't think that there's going to be like this massive tectonic shift that's going to occur, but as with a lot of really, engaged game players, who just love playing games for the sake of playing games and finding that fun, you're going to find a lot of, curious, players, right? And we're already starting to see that. And there's this interplay and like, Venn diagram of users that are going to continue to play free to play games as they understand it because that's what they know. But there's also going to be that subset that's going to start dipping their toe into crypto enabled games, what blockchain means. And as that friction layer starts going away, I can see them making the distinction, kind of like what Mitch was pointing out of, hey, if I can get the same experience over here, in a blockchain enabled game where I own those assets and I can do things with them like speculate, sell, trade, and so on and so forth, why would I go back to playing a standard traditional free to play game that's completely inflationary and I don't really have the throughput that I can have here? And obviously I'm simplifying all of that, but I think that's going to happen, but it's going to be gradual. As it relates to like the business metrics, looking at ARPDAU and ARPPU and all that stuff. What I think is really interesting about the blockchain NFT space because of, the primary store that you have in a game, but also the secondary marketplace, and not just one secondary marketplace, right? Because eventually over time, I can imagine, NFTs not just living on a place like OpenSea, but I can see it living in just about any secondary marketplace economy out there. Well, then if you're a PM, well, you're going to have to start thinking about what does ARPPU actually mean across that entire spectrum. It's not just in your primary game anymore, right? You also have to think about users that are coming from the other end. Maybe they're not even opening your game. Maybe they're just purely speculating on assets that are within your economy and your tokenomics, but you have to count them as players too, right? They're just playing it from a different angle. And then you're going to have the people that are in between that are doing both. How do you calculate for that and ensure, that quote unquote LTV is going to be there when you look at the totality holistically of players in your ecosystem? I think that is going to create a different lens in how you look at your business. And the current crop of games that are super successful right now, and when we talk about lifecycle management, merchandising, all that other stuff, I mean, the scales of economy are just it's pretty amazing to watch, right? So I think that's something really interesting to take a look at. And just anecdotally, without giving away any like company trade secrets, like I know for a fact internally, as we started optimizing our product, as you would do in standard free to play for retention, engagement, so on and so forth, but also opening up our marketplace more and more. Because Mitch is right, like right now, you can't really trade officially at Blankos on OpenSea, but we're looking, into avenues of doing things like that. But even as we're like opening up our marketplace from like an alpha state to a beta state and inviting more players in, we're seeing all types of emergent behavior that you can't get in standard free to play, and it's increased all our metrics, engagement, monetization. It's just across the board because now you're giving players a lot more fluidity and choice on what they get to do with their set assets. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So yeah, to me, it's also it's not going to be a short-term, life cycle, but we're steadily marching towards I think the inevitable trend of total ownership and what does that mean for businesses in the overall ecosystem? Yeah, that's TBD, right?
Brian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting aspects for me on this is that, the notion that hardcore gamers have been funding games for, almost well over a decade now. It's really since the advent of microtransactions. And Mitch had talked earlier about how, maybe 6-7 years ago it was controversial that some publishers were including MTX in a, live operations season pass oriented game. And then whenever kind of Fortnite came in and shook up the industry, that stuff kind of became more natural over time. People got more comfortable with it with their top tier IP. There's a lot of free to play IP out there that 5 years ago you wouldn't think would be free. But that the funding in that mechanism where hardcore gamers have been supporting games has been pretty inefficient because 30% goes to the App Store. There's publisher economics and overhead, and as a result, like players have like a questionable way of return on investment and long-term value. And like right now, we're starting to see that pendulum swing around. And in this space, like new tech is always pointed squarely at gaming first, and it's been this way since semiconductors were invented. And it's true with AR and VR tech, even though it's like has bigger implications for other things. But like the more people I talk to about this space with crypto and NFT, it's such a logical use case for gaming. And that opinion is shared really between developers and hardcore gamers, which is like a special relationship that hasn't really gone that direction yet. So like, those studios have a lot of options now in how they're funding and raising capital and approaching their investors. And they can use that investment on their own or with the VC community and investor community as such. But like, I think the point that CA brought up here that was pretty interesting is like these studios almost need an investor relations function now, or like, but it's not like a traditional sense, like a publisher with public markets investors. Like those investors don't matter. Like if you have a mint right now or something like that, there's a very selective part of the community that you need to get behind you and have invested in that studio. And then it's really the onus is on the studio to keep those folks involved and feel like they matter and involved in the process. And I think that's a mutually exclusive good outcome for both of them in the long run.
Yep. I can speak to that personally. I am the investor relations for our players who are investing in what we're building. Not necessarily at the corporate level, but when the players are actually asking about what we're doing, they're grilling me on our white paper. They're asking about our tokenomics. I am the person that's literally dealing with questions at 3 a.m. from people all around the world.
But Mitch, speaking. Go ahead. Go ahead, Brian.
Can Mitch just give 30 seconds on his project? Maybe it would just help everybody.
Sure, I'm happy to explain about it. So I'm leaning on a game called Million on Mars Land Rush. And so we're developing a game that is purely built around being browser-based, as widely accessible as possible to as many people, centered largely around land development, crafting, resource management, and an entirely player-owned economy that they themselves are completely participatory in. We don't hold any of the token that we're making available inside of our game. It is purely built around an economy of the players themselves that are contributing.
Right. And maybe speaking about, successful blockchain games, could you guys, like, what are the games that the audience here should be aware of in terms of, obviously everyone's heard of Axie, but like other games that you think that people should be aware of or that are the most successful by traction or whatever?
I can go first if you want.
Yeah, please.
I would first say that like it's challenging to look at things just under the lens of success because to me it's incredibly early and our actual adoption rates in this space are just at the absolute minute beginnings. But to me,
Right.
like it's worthwhile to look at examples of what I think solve a lot of the fundamental use cases or are proving out some of the core pieces required for a game to really grow and succeed. So I think that Axie is a good example in the generalized sense of like showing a way in which a multiple engaged audience can participate, where you have these breeders as well as these battlers that play the game, and both of them coexist within this ecosystem. And I think that there's a lot that could be learned from seeing how that game functions and as well as its white paper is written. And I'll throw out a couple more quick ones to sort of complement that. On the engine marketplace, the engine ecosystem rather, there's a game called Lost Relics, which is an action RPG sort of similar to Diablo 2, but with roguelike elements. I think that game still has a lot of promise. It's made by a single developer who's been working on it for multiple years and continues to build and improve on the game. And it's just incredibly fun, and the community behind that game is really, really supportive. And then on the space side, there's also on Engine, there's Space Misfits, which is also a space dogfighting game that's starting to gain a lot of traction as well.
Okay. C or Brian, any other thoughts on games that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not particular call outs per se, but what I think is interesting is if you take a look at a lot of the games that are in marketplace today, whether it's by, on-chain activity or however way you're measuring what success looks like, right? What I think is fascinating is how many different chains they're actually on, right? So like Axes, on their own now with Ronin. You got games like what is it? The one that was on our list, Crypto Blades, right? I think they're on Binance.
Binance Smart
right?
Chain, yeah.
Yeah, right. They're on Binance. You got like the old school guys like Upland. I think they're on like EOS.io or something.
And
what
I'm
are
on
you
their
building
sister.
on?
I'm on
You-
Wax, which is the
that's
sister
right. You're on-
network to EOS.
That's right. So you're on
Yep.
Wax, right? So what I think is fascinating is there's several products. Oh, and then one of my favorites right now that I'm kind of like researching into is like Zedrun, right? Like I don't know if you guys seen that. It's like Tron inspired horse racing essentially.
Yeah, it's amazing.
yeah,
have
they're
you
like
seen their
on-
Twitch channel? It's
it's-
so captivating.
Yeah, there's some really fun stuff with those guys. I think for me, the tipping point was when I saw it in a bar and people were streaming it, like live streaming people racing in a bar. And people were just literally there just watching like horse racing like you would with any other sport, right? But they're also on Poly, on Matic,
Matic.
right? So many different chains, so many different products. How do you keep track of it all? I mean, if you guys have a good solution for that, please DM me after this. But I think it's just fascinating that there are communities being built around these products, and it's the communities that are really driving overall retention, economy, so on and so forth. But it's not like what we're accustomed to in standard free-to-play games, where you're expecting to see 500,000, million, 2 million DAU coming in through your product and hoping that a small percentage or sliver of your audience is doing like monetization or whatever. It's like almost the inverse of that. Like you're seeing, hundreds of thousands of DAU, right? And they're able to generate that much volume on both sides of the fence. To me, that's what's fascinating. And that's why it's hard for me to quantify like what's the best, what's the most successful.
Right.
Because you got to really dig deep and take multiple razors to it.
Yeah, and while we're talking about different chain technology, Mitch, I know we had a conversation offline before about the different trade-offs, but maybe for our audience, could you explain like the different things that developers need to be aware of or think about when they pick a specific technology, whether it's transaction fees or whatever?
Yeah. So for me, the things that I look at, and mind you, I've got a long history of working still in free-to-play games, so I largely took my same original lens of performance marketing based, user acquisition, and tried to think of like how does this sort of model work in a blockchain environment. So to me, it's still about the same kind of underlying principles of trying to cast the sort of widest net as possible, segmenting and targeting your users in a way in which you can get their attention, get them to check out what you're building, and then give them an experience in which they can actually play, feel fulfilled, and stick around for a while. Now, those things don't always work super well if you're trying to sell something up front, trying to release a token up front, trying to do really anything before you actually have a game ready to go. So if that's sort of your expected approach, I can't necessarily say that everything that I'm going to suggest is going to work perfectly, because the reality is that like everyone should be focusing on having a product before they're trying to do those other things, because you're just pumping and front running your own product, your own business, and I think that there's a lot of risk involved with doing that if your actual delivered experience at the end of the day doesn't line up with all the promises that you've made for a long time. That said, when looking at actual blockchains, the things that I evaluate are the obvious things. How many users actually exist on the entire network, and how accessible is it for someone new to actually get in there, create an account, create a wallet? Things like Ethereum and other networks, you might be asking, how much does it cost to actually transact and exist on those networks? So every single transaction sometimes has a cost associated with it, often referred to as gas costs. And on Ethereum, their gas is called Gwei. And an actual basic level of transaction can cost as much as $10 to $12 or as much as hundreds of dollars, really depending on what's going on at any given time on the network. And these are on any kind of layer one, which is sort of these primary network blockchain networks like Ethereum or blockchain and such, most of these layer one solutions have very high transactional costs just because that's the cost of doing business. That's how big those networks are, and you're competing to pay for priority against everyone else. We're starting to now see interoperability in layer two solutions and other proof of other types of state-based blockchains that are beyond just proof of work, that are proof of state or proof of authority, that offer opportunities to reduce all of those costs and all of those frictions and make those things a lot more accessible for everyone. So on the Ethereum side, there's Immutable, there's and a whole bunch of other options, which I'm just totally drawing a blank for. There's other networks like Solana. Wax has its own approach, which is built around low friction. And to me, like the other final component, of course, is the marketplace. And it's something that is incredibly critical. And it's, I think, the one thing that many developers are not spending enough attention looking at, which is the actual available place to buy and sell NFTs that exist for those users on that chain, assuming you're not building one yourself. To me, like, if you're looking to hit the ground running fast, if you're looking to get out of the gate, then you should ideally try to find a blockchain that has a mature marketplace with a lot of active customers that are looking to purchase things, and that whatever price points you're looking to list and have your items at actually fit within the buying price ranges that marketplace is accustomed to. So selling $20 NFTs on OpenSea is not practical because it's $50 to $60 for most transaction fees. So you're going to be charging more fees than those items are even worth, and it's not a reliable fit, even though making a MetaMask wallet is relatively okay once you get comfortable with the way that the design is working.
Right. And then, Brian, just to follow up with you in terms of some of the companies that you think we should be aware of, did you have any other blockchain gaming companies that you think we should know about?
Yeah, I think we chatted about Crypto Blades and Alien Worlds and Upland, Splinterlands, of course. Axie is the one that everyone's talking about right now. I really do like the segment where you have like land, and Mitch is talking about this right now, but rarity of actual land and a physical scape for the game. So I think like the Manas of the world and sandboxes are intriguing, and you can see they're starting to pull in new users through partnerships with people like Snoop Dogg and things like that. So the space is definitely getting healthy around how you attract more users inorganically or organically, however it may be. The part that I'm most focused on right now is really the inception of how these studios are being formed and kind of where they come from. And, that diligence loop that I referred to earlier where, gamers and collectors or NFT investors or whatever are doing their own diligence loops. And, it's like on one hand, I definitely have the experience and like the sophistication that brings in like a banking context or like a publisher context. And it's certainly not that. But it is like quick and efficient and clean, and it seems like the bar is definitely there. And I think folks are generally trying to be more cognizant about what kind of things they're investing in, and not just buying NFTs willy-nilly. This notion of utility is creeping in. Like, what does this get me besides a picture? And it reminds me of just like the classic free-to-play model that Mitch and Sean were talking about all the first part of this chat. It's a really interesting time in gaming, and I think that studios just have a lot of options, and I think there's going to be a lot of creativity coming out of this cycle.
Right. And maybe we can now kind of shift and talk a little bit more about applications in terms of gaming. Like, how do you apply blockchain technology in specific ways to a game? And so there's some notion of like having on-chain game items, which can then be transacted on an open marketplace. There's a notion of land sales. I think that's what you guys are doing on Million on Mars, Mitch. There's the potential concept of using social tokens or having some form of DAO. But like, could you guys talk about the other applications that we may not be aware of, or that may be coming up or emerging that you expect to see in blockchain games in the near future or the later future? And maybe starting with you, Mitch.
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of the fundamentals we've largely already discussed and largely center around a higher level notion of like owning what you earn and have inside of a game. But I think that it's worth calling out a really important distinction, which is that this notion of like ownership and property rights that we just infer as like the inevitable sort of direction that we're moving towards is actually a right that's not available to about 80% of the world. The actual rights to owning property and land, your assets, any of these things don't exist for billions of people around the world. And to me, blockchains and NFTs and play to earn games that, to an extent as well, actually represent the start of a real revolution that's going to be happening in the future, in which we actually enable people to have ownership rights for these assets, that those things can then be used as a fundamental underpinning for real financial institutions that need to be built inside of those countries, so that people can take their NFTs, they can get collateralized loans, they can have opportunities for things like fractionalization, lending, renting, trading, like all the things that are required for a actual thriving capitalist type society, and to allow these people to move from traditional mercantilism into an actual like modern capitalist society. And to me, this financial sort of opportunity is going to transform the world. And I feel that the real sort of part of this sort of emerging space that almost no one is talking about is that, to me, that is the blue ocean that's coming. That is the biggest market opportunity that no one is paying attention to. And I want, like, and to me, like, everyone should be going after it, because like there's probably easily billion people that no one is paying attention to about this market.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Mitch, which is like, and I asked you guys a question before about what is the potential risk of blockchain to like monetization, but I think this point that you're making, Mitch, about actually the notion of ownership, that maybe for a large part of the world, playing a game and owning an NFT or some type of digital item is their stock market, right? Is like, this is kind of how they actually, that's a super interesting point. And so from that perspective, it might be more the engagement model and the point that you guys are underscoring, the ownership issue, which is like the real big impact of blockchain and gaming. But CA, what do you think?
Yeah, I largely agree with that sentiment. At the end of the day, I think we've been all talking about it. It's the ability to own a digital asset like it's mine, and if your asset becomes of a certain value. So if you're, some of the lucky few that got into, let's say, CryptoPunks early on, or you got a Bored Ape, look at the value of those assets and the collateralization that can occur. I think that's super interesting. Right, which is, I think, partly one of the reasons why like Axie has taken off the way that it has. But then again, like just for the sake of the audience, when we talk about things like fractionalization, I think we're just at the start of doing that. Right. So if you have an asset that you can now digitally fractionalize, and so you now split, let's say, said CryptoPunk into 100 different pieces, so that now 100 people can own a piece or a chunk of that particular asset class that then also has some type of inherent value behind it, that becomes really powerful, right? So then there's a variety of different, I think, modalities that will get created as this market becomes more mature, and that's not even talking about, certain things that are already happening around staking, your particular assets with various tokens and, currencies that are out there, creating liquidity pools, having various yield strategies with APY. Like, I know this is kind of going more into like the banking financing side, but the fact that you can do that with digital assets, I think that's what's really fascinating. And oh, by the way, this is a game and you should be having fun. And to me, like, and this is just my own personal, I guess, I don't know, picadillo or something, but I don't like that, term play to earn, to be completely honest. At least not the, the angle that I'm coming from, which I think, you guys will also agree with. Like, to me, it's play and earn, right? Like, at least in my POV, and I think what Mythical's trying to do is like, we're looking at it from like, you have to have a fun game, first and foremost, full stop. It has to be fun. And then from there, because of the inherent nature of having NFTs and digital ownership, you have that earn component, but it's not the primary thing that's driving you, which I don't think is always the case with some of the other products in marketplace, but that's a topic for another time. But all of those different things, I think, really lends itself to really interesting business cases that we're barely scratching the surface at, and I think that's what's really powerful about it.
Right.
Ryan,
what do you think? I'm sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that really shocked me over the past couple of weeks that kind of flew under the radar was this Twitter fully embracing Bitcoin as like a tipping mechanism. And like in that it's just, it seemed like it was kind of quiet for what it was. And if you think about that, Twitter's like, 300 million MAU. It's like, it's massive. And the more you guys talk about securitization and things, I start to get like sweats about my old career in Wall Street. When I moved into mobile gaming, it already reminded me of the equities market in general, how like the genres fluctuate and certain like growth industries erupt out of anywhere. But now the further I get into this space with NFTs and blockchain, it's like each one of these games is their own separate economy, and people care about the secondary market. There's still like supply and demand vectors. There's market making. There's like rarities and things like that. It's surprising to me how sophisticated it has gotten in such a short period of time, and perhaps it's a product of people having like nothing better to do in the past couple of years. But it seems like there's been a lot of acceleration on this stuff in gaming, and it just makes like a lot of logical sense. And to answer your question directly, I do think there's some ability for this to like expand further into gaming beyond just a content perspective. Think about like viewership on Twitch and things like that, how people are sharing and creating gaming moments inside of games and esports tournaments. I think that those are also things where some of the bigger publishers can get involved with their tournaments and things like that. That would be the ones that I think we're probably not thinking right away apart from content.
Okay. I had a conversation with a certain game company CEO, and one of the reasons why he was so excited about crypto in gaming is because he's like, it's so hard. Like, it's so difficult to set up a wallet, do all this stuff. And despite terrible UI, despite like a terrible kind of user experience, people are going whole hog into like NFTs and things like that. And so when you guys think about like some of the remaining challenges for wider spread adoption by just more of the general public, more people, so that, crypto and gaming becomes much, much wider spread, what do you guys think are some of these key challenges that need to be addressed? Maybe starting with you again, Mitch?
Sure. There's where to begin. The list literally never ends. And like I talked about a few of these things in terms of like when evaluating a blockchain you might put your product on. From the consumer side of things, the friction is an even greater challenge than it is from a development perspective, because you have to not only implement a solution that is viable to some extent, that maybe is legally compliant. I don't really, depending on what you're doing. But what's more challenging is that you have to also educate all of your players how to get completely involved into the ecosystem that you're attached to. So, and that's in many ways teaching them how to make a wallet on the platform you're on, which is not your brand, how to go set up and move tokens or specific currencies into that wallet, which again is on an exchange that's not your brand, in a currency or a token that's not yours as well. Then to actually connect that to your account, get it into the game. Like all these things are like hurdles and gaps that people fall off on. And then on top of that, it's all the other things like wallet management, seed phrasing, gas fees, transaction failures, gas wars, token matching, where you've got differences between BEP tokens, ERC20 tokens, and BEP20 tokens. And there's all the things like liquidity pooling and permanent loss, like there's just, it never ends. And like, it's why if you ask most people that have been in the blockchain or crypto scene for any amount of time how well they sleep, they probably don't, because there's just a never ending amount of things that you have to keep learning every single day. And as the phrase goes, crypto never sleeps.
See?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mitch nailed a lot of the friction points that's top of mind for people in the space right now, right? There's a lot. I think it's getting better to some degree. I think there's a lot of really interesting, technology companies out there that are solving for these problems. And so while to take a step back, I think it's what you said earlier. There's all this friction, but there's all these people diving in and learning and overcoming the hurdles to get into the thing, right? I think that in of itself is a massive signal, right? If early adopters are willing to go through landmines and crawling through barbed wire to essentially get to the promise of a particular game outcome, what have you. I think those problems will largely get solved as they typically do within our space, right? So I'm not as concerned about that. And so education, if I were to bucket everything that Mitch said, education absolutely critical, right? Which is why I think a lot of companies are also, very transparent about the way that they, talk about their projects, writing white papers. It's almost, opposite of what you would see with the traditional game, right? Where developers are busy in their studio making all these things, and then, I don't know, a year or two later, they finally come out with the first look. It's almost the opposite of that, right? So putting education aside as, yes, that's a thing that needs to happen, the other kind of friction point, I think, is trust. Because there's so many different studios that are coming up and talking about this token, this chain, that chain, on ramp, off ramp, whatever. It really comes down to trust, because ultimately at the end of the day, when you do, let's say, an online transaction, you're putting in your credit card information into a thing and expecting something to get delivered to your house. Most people probably can't even explain to you what the protocol for that actually is, a technical implementation of how to get that done. Why? Because at the end of the day, you trust something with, I don't know, whether it's a Visa logo or the Amazon brand or wherever you shop at, there's a certain implicit trust that comes along with that, and we're not quite there yet. So in addition to the education piece, I think it's absolutely critical that the companies that are currently at the forefront trying to solve for these problems, they have to build up that level of trust. And I think transparency and education is one of those vectors. But I'm sure there's others that I'm missing as well. But I think that's also a very critical pillar.
I think Mitch and Chung just nailed like almost everything that I could possibly think of. The only two things I would add would be the first would be shifting from PC to everything else. And it's kind of an odd thing because the kind of revolution's happening on PC for a change, in the notion that consumers don't really own the software layer of their phone. So like Apple and Google have a big question in their minds right now about how big this market is and how much they want to spur that development on mobile. But once it's mobile, your audience already gets 4 to 5 times larger overnight, and the distribution as such also gets a lot easier.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? So I think it's just a matter of when. There's no way that companies like Apple and Google are not looking at the space intently. I mean, you already have like massive companies like the Microsofts and Amazons of the world that's already forked Ethereum and created their own branch because they're testing, they're iterating, they're trying to have a POV. Yeah, so I agree with Brian. There's going to come a point in time where it's going to be on every platform that we can think of, especially mobile. And then what does it do to the overall kind of like landscape? Yeah, it's going to be pretty transformative.
Right. And, it's been really great to see a lot of innovation in this space, like different types of products and things coming. But I was wondering if you guys could speculate in terms of what do you think is coming next in terms of new types of games or new kinds of experiences? If you were to speculate on something else coming up, what do you guys think? Mitch?
I think I know I take a deep breath. No, I think we'll see a game played by 1 billion people. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think that, or very, very close to 1 billion people. I think we're going to completely redefine the order of magnitude in which people participate and consume within games. How long it takes us to get there, I'm not entirely certain, but I feel very, very strongly that the whole world is going to be participating in a lot of ways in these evolving experiences.
Okay. CA?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to like chew on what Mitch just said. It's interesting. Yeah, I guess my perspective on it is, maybe I'm not as optimistic, or at least my POV isn't in that regard. I almost see it as like the other way around, where a lot of the times free to play products require massive amounts of players to come through just because of the churn factor, right? I almost feel like we're going to find ecosystems of players that may get pretty large. Don't get me wrong. Like some games will get up to probably like 1 million, 2 million DAO at some point, but I actually think it's going to be sub-million, really engaged users. But the game studios are going to come out with various ways for those players to engage in. So I think we've seen a lot of that with games that have, like, say, Twitch integration. Right, so what are they trying to cater to? Hey, I'm a pro. I'm really good at this game. Maybe you're not so good, but you can aspire to be good by watching me play, or you're just watching because like you're kind of like living through this particular pro. But because of things like social tokens, because of scarcity, and because of other avenues to potentially be part of that ecosystem, and not necessarily the person that's the really good Twitch player, I think new business lines are going to get created. Right? I think there's going to be different ways to engage with the game that we haven't necessarily thought through all of it yet. because we're, again, at the very forefront of this, trying to figure it out. And I think similar to like the secondary marketplace versus the primary game player, similar to that model where you're seeing various player archetypes coming in, but never really engaging with the game and vice versa per se. I think there's going to be other lines of that play that we're going to see, almost like in Hunger Games, like the movie where I support a person, I'm able to literally airdrop, like items to said players, and I'm involved in that way. Maybe it's anonymous, it's not. Well, you actually have the ability to do that now, right? Because airdropping is actually a technique, right? And so I don't want to ramble on, but my point is I think there's going to be various ways that we're going to see new experiences coming up because of scarcity, because of assets, and so on and so forth. And that's going to potentially widen the pool and maybe change the way that we define what a gamer is, right? What a participant is, within the economy.
Right.
Yeah, if this is predictions, I would say that, I would expect one of the industry heavyweights to put NFTs behind one of their larger IPs. And then I think we're going to have like a 6 to 12 month arms race on like pre-sale numbers, and kind of likening back to the old days of how many units did this game do and how many units did this game do. And I think that some of those numbers, frankly, for the right IP could get shocking. Like I think we'll get a $100 million first, and I think it'll be $1 billion before 24 months is over. I just want to use that 1 billion that Mitch said in some other way.
Yeah, and maybe we could like expand upon that a little bit further in terms of the large publishers and what their potential next move could be. And certainly you can imagine something like a Hearthstone, the natural fit of NFTs and crypto to that kind of a game. But like, do you guys have any other ideas in terms of how the big publishers might leverage NFT and crypto for whether it's specific IP or in certain ways? And maybe, Brian, we could start with you since you brought it up.
We'll go from the left. This is actually kind of like talking Mitch's book too, to some degree. I think the biggest potential in the space right now has that kind of sandbox feel to it, but it has like a traditional big IP attached to it, like MMOs, MMORPGs. The notion that you could own a house in, let's just say, Azeroth or whatever, and have a clan with an economic base and like tithing and all this other stuff. I think that would just be massive. But it has to be like a complex quality game. A lot of the interpretations we're seeing now in the space, whether it be Axie or whatever, like hats off for those guys as like extreme innovators in the financial side, the tech side, like everything that they've done has carved a path for so many other studios out there. But I think someone's going to knock it out of the park, either at a publisher or a developer that could actually, like, this is the kind of tech cycle in gaming that can give birth to new IP that can be around for the next 30 years. And yeah, it's usually early in the cycle too.
Okay. CA?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Brian just said. I think the power of the traditional publishers, particularly ones that own really iconic IPs, it has power, right? Like, it already has a formed community that has certain expectations. But as players evolve with, different core loops and meta games that occur, they're also looking for, different ways of playing the games and that brands that they love. So could I see a AAA publisher, let's say, I'm just going to make this up, but let's say, like Call of Duty decides to do a NFT blockchain enabled product and bring that to market? Is that going to create innovation to continue to cater to their massive fan base and just keep it going along? Absolutely. I think that's going to happen. I think the question is, who's going to be the first one to do it? Right? I think that's the biggest question. And I think it's going to be interesting to see who does it. And I guess the second part of that is, as the bigger brands, the bigger publishers, the bigger IPs come to market, to what extent is it going to be a one-to-one to the current experience that players have now? Because back to Mitch's point earlier around, this does, kind of feel like the early days of social and free-to-play where, games on Facebook social canvas, I mean, let's be honest, those games were not, AAA quality, high-fidelity products, right? But from a systems design, game design perspective, they were pretty solid, right? Like the complexity and depth of those products were there. It's just, from a client-facing perspective, maybe it wasn't. So maybe we'll see that renaissance as well, where the complexity of the product, because of the audience that's attracted to NFTs right now, it's leaning more towards that, making sure that there's depth and reach. And then as with all, technology and platform cycles, you're going to see that graphical fidelity kind of catch up to more modern sensibilities, especially as we smooth out some of the friction points that we had talked about earlier. But at that point, who knows? Maybe at that point it's super mature, right? Similar to free to play. So yeah, I agree with a lot of what Brian said.
Mitch?
Oh, I don't know what else to say. You guys covered a lot of really good points. I guess the thing that sort of stuck out to me about this is I feel like it is still incredibly early on all of the things that we're doing, and there's a big unknown in terms of like how players will gravitate towards these experiences, how much they will invest inside of these experiences. But there are some small observations that I've seen that are truly unique to this entire space. One of them that I would call out is I feel that people that click into the notion of play to earn or blockchain games, like it flips a switch in their brain that doesn't go back. I would strongly encourage anyone that's making these games or talk with players that play them and ask them if they want to go back and play Red Dead Redemption or any of those other games. I've almost rarely have ever talked to anyone who actually goes back and actively plays games once they start to get into this space. To me, that's the real like sign of a complete like turning point in this entire industry and the birth of a real new paradigm.
Got it. So, those are all the questions that I have. So maybe we could end with like, if you guys could talk about how, if anyone's interested, how they could get in touch with you. And if you have one last message or word of advice for our audience, and starting with you, Mitch.
Sure. I'm pretty easy to reach. I'm on all the major socials. I'm on LinkedIn. You can check out our website at milliononmars.io, or you can go to milliononmars.com/Discord if you want to come chat with us directly. We're working on a lot of really cool stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, you can find me at chong@mythical.games. Feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to chat. I'm also on all the major social media channels, although, to be completely honest, I probably only check LinkedIn. So you guys can find me there. I guess one thing is, like, I know there's a lot of people talking about, things in the space, but if you're curious, there's tons of literature. Go read it. Right? Like, it's surprising, again, kind of going back to this idea around transparency. There's so much literature out there. Go read that stuff first, see if it resonates. And then if you do, there's tons of people that would walk you through it, because I think, at least for one of the few times in my career, it's very inclusive, right? Like, when I have questions, because I will be the first one to raise my hand and say, I'm not an expert, but I'm trying to become one. And there's a lot of people that are willing to help. So be curious, go read, reach out, help build a community, and we can build something awesome together.
All right, Brian?
Yeah, if you need to get in touch, LinkedIn's easiest. Just to kind of close on elaborating what Chong just said, I think that this truly is a time when the middleman is caught out. And if you are finding something that's interesting in the NFT space online, I would just really encourage you to reach out to the team behind it and get on Discord, talk to everybody, talk to people that are buying things and selling things. And the diligence loop is early, but the folks that are really going to shine through are the ones that are hitting milestones, the ones that are keeping in touch with their base and keeping them excited, and also just launching a really cool product. Thanks for the time, Joe.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. Thanks for a great discussion, and for our audience, catch y'all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.